Hey you, get off your phone. Hi, I'm Cielo Cervantes. Today we're going to be talking about phone use and its impact. I apologize if I might go a little bit long on this one, but the more that I did research into the topic, the more there was a wealth of content and subject matter to talk about. So stay with me. Thanks. Smartphones have changed the world. According to latest census data, 84% of U.S. households use smartphones. The younger generation has grown up with smartphones as a way of life and socialization. But these new methods of communication and the wealth of the internet in our pocket has truly affected us all. But is there a price to be paid for this great convenience? Let's take a closer look. While the basic design of smartphones has only gradually evolved since the debut of the original iPhone, the apps, social media, and tech giants have had plenty of time to refine their approach to us, their users. The first thing to keep in mind is if it's free, you are the product. Many apps and services are free. Companies have learned how to exploit our psychological weaknesses in order to subtly maximize your attention on their service. As a user, your use and profile information is collected en masse and sold to third parties as a tradable good, and in return, advertisements are targeted to you to an uncanny degree. This is why sometimes we'll be seeing advertisements for things and it's like, are they spying on us? Kind of. And as we use our phones, notifications come at us at a constant drip, reminding us to check back in, disrupting our current thoughts and actions. Sometimes these notifications include likes or other forms of positive feedback. So it is a constant cycle of uncertain rewards. This uncertainty affects our value determination, inflating our sense of potential return and keeping us coming back, which can lead to addiction. The constant disruption and unknown factor can activate the sympathetic nervous system, triggering a shot of adrenaline and create a stress response that can take up to 30 minutes to recover from. Since notifications keep coming, this chronic stress can develop into further health problems such as depression, sleep deprivation, chronic fatigue, and heart disease. And because most internet media makes more money from serving more advertisements, the longer you are engaged with the content, the more money they make. This is why most YouTube videos have changed towards longer form and drawn out videos, and websites are either broken up into advertisement-laden slideshows or infinite scrolling walls of images, videos, and text. Sex, violence, and controversy constantly rise up to the top, exploiting our basest instincts. Content algorithms don't care what the content is, as long as you're engaged. But this means that our emotions are constantly triggered, which is why phones and online content feels so engaging. But this artificial inflation of controversial topics and opinions has served to stoke social division and increase polarization to a precarious degree in our society. But yes, phones are great. Phones are undoubtedly powerful in their ability to inform, connect, and entertain us. But how does this constant use impact us? One of the biggest things that the smartphone has revolutionized is its camera. By constantly having access to a camera, we can document and share our lives in countless ways. However, studies have shown that simply by taking a picture of something, it actually hurts our ability to remember it. Have you ever been to a concert and seen all the people filming the concert and looking at their phone screen instead of engaging with the environment around them? Not only are they less likely to remember details in the future, they're less able to focus on the present and engage with the people around them. Our focus is impacted too, due to the constant distractions from notifications. Texting while driving caused drivers to take their eyes off the road for an average of 23 seconds and doubled the risk of fatal crashes. And there were 3 times the risk of fatality if you needed to reach for your phone and dial a contact. And with the sheer volume of content available to us on our phones, it may seem like it's a good thing. But this abundance of choice also has a way of taking the path of least resistance. That is to say, the easiest and the most salient content available, which is usually a social media infinite scroll wall or something similar. This breadth of content turns us into content grazers, losing some capacity to focus, reducing our attention span, and perhaps affecting our ability to be in the present, which we can observe ourselves by the way time seems to melt away when we use these devices. Phones offer little room for reflection, and this loss of agency and intention can minimize productive actions and decrease our actual happiness. It is a paradox of choice that we tend to be happier and more creative when we have fewer options and more restrictions. And studies have shown that even the mere presence of a phone can cause empathy levels to drop. This is true amongst both friends and strangers. This is a crucial thing to understand because without intimacy and connection, our relationships can suffer significantly. It has been shown that active constructing responding, for instance, such as offering support for our friends and loved ones, is important to building intimacy and building those relationships. But are we able to do this while distracted by our phones and devices? Even worse than ignoring our loved ones, our desire for more pleasure and engagement from our devices can also cause us to lash out at them like addicts, as the real-life interaction begins to be regarded as a disruption to the digital interaction. But I hear you saying, life is different now. We are connecting, just differently. While that may be true, those that lived in the time before cell phones often lament about what we've lost since then. But how do we know it was really better, and in what ways? And if you ask Gen Z teenagers and millennials today, they will often express how much they love, use, and rely on their cell phones. They can't imagine life without it. But is it really better? Fortunately, the widespread adoption of smartphones makes it fairly simple to compare generational differences. So what things have the younger generation lost then, compared with previous generations before smartphones were ubiquitous? Well, first, time hanging out with friends. If we compare frequent in-person interaction with friends, we can see a small drop-off as technology took hold in the late 90s and early 2000s. But there is a dramatic shift downwards at the advent of when most kids and teens started getting a hold of smartphones. Since then, it's been in steady decline. Also, we've lost development of social skills. With less in-person interaction with friends, the development of social skills can also be stunted. From researcher and psychology professor Jean Twenge, today's 10th graders go to about 17 fewer parties a year than 10th graders in the 1980s did. Overall, 12th graders now spend an hour less on in-person social interaction on average a day than their Gen X predecessors did. Twenge's study also revealed that 56% of 14 to 18-year-olds went out on dates in 2015, compared with 85% of Generation X, which is those born between 1965 and 1984. They also spent less time outside. From a recent study, teens aged 11 to 18 are now spending an average of 10 hours a day using digital media, and this number specifically does not include any time watching TV. This is 70 hours a week, or, for comparison's sake, enough time to hold both a full-time job and a part-time job. This is time spent either indoors or significantly less involved with the outside world. And there's a significant rise in sleep deprivation, which is tied to a host of other health and developmental concerns for teenagers. This chart shows a recent breakdown between low usage and high usage of digital media, as well as shows a further breakdown between intact and non-intact families, where the higher red percentage is from non-intact families with either a single parent or a step-parent. Today's teens also seem less motivated to drive and experience what used to be a milestone of adulthood. Look at the dip in this graph, which shows a fairly dramatic 10 to 15% drop-off between 2005 and 2015. This trend has surprisingly dipped down even further since the data in this graph, with a 2018 report from the Federal Highway Administration reporting that only 61% of 18-year-olds in the U.S. had a driver's license, down from 80% in 1983. The number of 16-year-olds with licenses has decreased from 46% to 24% in the same period. But what things have increased since the advent of smartphones? Well, there's loneliness. This graph shows that loneliness actually was trending down for about a decade, perhaps aided by the onset of technology, which did bring teenagers together in new ways. That is, until the onset of the smartphone, when it started demanding more of their attention. While phones may connect us in some ways, the actual feelings of loneliness are rising. And there's a big one: depression. With rates of major depressive episodes doubling for teenagers in the last decade. With less face-to-face interaction and physical connection, the risk factors for depression have increased significantly. This rise in depression is corroborated by other more recent cross-sectional studies that include other countries, such as in Ontario, where the proportion of teenagers reporting moderate to serious mental distress has nearly doubled in just 4 years, increasing from 24% in 2013 to 39% in 2017. Self-harm has also increased dramatically, especially amongst young women, with ER visits from cutting and other forms of self-harm that have more than doubled in just 1 decade. Females face an onslaught pressures online to conform and participate in this idealized and often superficial standards of social media. And cyberbullying from peers and the wider internet can lead to devastating impacts. Twenge calls this the compare and despair attitude, which magnifies the feelings of inadequacy. The images that people choose to share online are highly curated and often misleading, and it is unrealistic and unfair to compare yourself to them, but teens are the most vulnerable to these influences. Lastly, suicide. Whether or not phones are the culprit, there is indeed a mental health crisis affecting teens today. Rates of suicide have increased 40% amongst teens in the last decade, and 1 in 5 high school students have considered taking their own life, and nearly 10% have attempted suicide. Early indicators signal that the rates of depression and suicide have only increased since the COVID pandemic, making this a critical moment to try and reverse course. Now, all this said, we would be remiss not to mention the classic mistake of misunderstanding correlation versus causation. While these correlations and observations are accurate, there is still not enough data or consensus to establish causal links to say cell phones have caused all of these severe impacts, especially when we are making broad generational statements regarding overall happiness or rates of depression. There are limitations to this type of an analysis, and as with most things in science, the full truth is constantly evolving as we observe and cope with an ever-changing digital landscape. Paradoxically, it may be the limitless data collection potential of cell phones that eventually helps us to find more definite answers to these questions. However, even if overuse of phones doesn't cause these things directly, the displacement of those many phone and device hours marks a radical shift that is changing not only how we behave, but how our brains develop and function. Those displaced hours used to be filled with supportive and engaged in-person activities that we know are critical to healthy development, positive outlook, and improved self-esteem. and without them, it seems we may be at a loss. For now, I invite you to just take some quiet time to reflect on the presence of technology and smartphones in your life. How does it really make you feel? Be honest. How does it affect your interactions with your friends, your family, your moment? Do your hours and days feel well lived, or do the days and weeks feel like they melt away? Are you able to concentrate on something for an extended period of time? Or do you feel drawn to keep jumping from task to task, from distraction to distraction? Whether we are engaged with our full real world or the virtual, our moments are limited, and really, they're all we have. Make them count. Thank you.